Parents, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. I think you're going to find that this is an incredibly important hour we're spending together because we've done a lot of surveys of your children, thousands of them over the last couple of weeks. And what we've found is that many of them, whether they're telling you or not, are anxious and worried. And it's interesting too, because we've been alive a lot longer and we see that this too shall end and we have perspective. And yet, to them in their short lives, not having seen this kind of extremely acute situation, it seems all overwhelming. And again, a lot of young people don't show that, but it's there. And it's with that in mind that I really have an enormous pleasure of introducing Dr. Joan Rosenberg. Now, the truth is that I've known Joan for a very, very long time. And she's one of those friends that you always wish you spent more time with, but you don't, and then you regret it. And over the years, she has really made a name for herself. She's always been extremely prominent within her field, but she's been a little bit under the radar as a psychologist and as a professor at Pepperdine University. But now she's published this magnificent book called 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. And let me first and foremost ask that you make a point of going on to Amazon, ordering this book, reading this book, leaving a review on this book. It's very, very special. And I think as a parent, it's a book that you should read, if not for yourself, to be a better parent. And one of the things that Joan talks about, and will be one of the subjects today, are unpleasant feelings. And she has several of them that she really highlights. And I just want to tell you which of those we have detected in young people, high-achieving young people, over the last couple of weeks. Sadness, helplessness, anger, disappointment, frustration, and vulnerability. So if this was ever a timely conversation, it's today. And it's with that in mind that I'd like to bring Joan in to meet you guys. Joan, are you there?
I'm right here, Richard, and eager and grateful. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, and the floor is now yours.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, and I'll make sure that I weave in a discussion of the feelings that Richard just mentioned. But the focus for today really is centered on resilience in the face of change. So if we go ahead and step forward, I just want to provide a context in terms of a shift to the slide. That this is, as we all know, this is a time of great change and great disruption. And if I spend time thinking about this, which I have, we've got four major things at play right now, and kind of feels like one rolling right after the other. So first, of course, is the coronavirus, linked directly with an economic downturn and the loss of work and wages, social unrest, particularly following the death of George Floyd, and I would throw in there some political uncertainty. So that I'd like to leave that last one off, but I think that that's also at play. So we're just experiencing, and as many have always talked about this when it first started, kind of an unprecedented experience. So if we go on to the next one, the way I frame what's taking place right now, if I think of it from an emotional standpoint, then what we're experiencing is actually a time of profound loss. And I'll dig into that momentarily. And also what many would describe as heightened fear or heightened anxiety. I actually prefer to look at it as a heightened vulnerability. And that too I will describe as we go along. We can go next again. So let's consider loss. And once again, I'm only capturing a handful of what's taking place. And so we have loss of life, which really tops the list. As I mentioned a moment ago, the loss of work and wages, routine and rituals. So the kinds of things that we might have expected, the commencements, the bar and bat mitzvahs, I mean, the list again, the travel, all those different kinds of things. Even what's even more painful is kind of not even be able to attend funerals where there's been loss of life. So we've lost, initially there was a loss of connection with nature, certainly a loss of human touch. We've lost a sense of familiarity, predictability, sense of security, and we've also lost what is imagined. So if we had plans for many different kinds of things, then this idea that I had an imagined future that I didn't get to experience, particularly like if we think about the commencements as an example, then that is also a loss of an imagined future that didn't take place. Now, what's interesting to me about this whole sheltering experience that we've been going through, in my mind, is that loss actually, I've got to take a drink of water. Loss begets loss. Meaning that if I think about, and what people talk about is the sense of smell can trigger a memory pretty quickly. And I actually think from an emotional standpoint, when we've experienced loss actually brings up memories of prior loss. So here we are, sheltering, quiet, not having the same level of distractions and enjoyments that we had been accustomed to experiencing. And I think what's also ended up happening for people is this has activated, excuse me, this has activated other memories, and those memories are also surfacing. So that it's not even that we're left dealing with just what we have in the moment today. It's also that we've got stuff coming up from the past that is like, where is this coming from? And again, maybe more for you as parents, maybe a little bit less with your kids, but I think it's important to understand this context. And again, any challenge has the seeds of opportunity in it. And with the sheltering and quiet, if we actually stay really present to it, not only can we start to work with the difficulties or the losses and face those, but it's also an invitation for us to again, take accountability of that from the past, but also an invitation to go forward in a very different way. So if we go ahead to the next slide. So again, what's our reaction? Many at the very beginning in particular started with shock. It's like denial was part of that. But again, these are common reactions that we see when they're shocked. A sense of overwhelm, there may be confusion, numbness, feeling frozen, anger or rage. Any of those may be, again, part of that initial shock reaction. And also, if we then start to dig into the grief, the way I personally look at grief is that it's at least the experiences of sadness, helplessness, anger, and disappointment. And as I said a moment ago, those losses are tied to the past based on the memories that might be surfacing. It's tied to the present based on what we're literally going through. And it's also tied to the future based on what, again, the word I use for this is grief over lost potentials. This is the loss of the imagined future, the travel, the commencements, the weddings, etc. So if we go ahead and go forward to the next slide. There we go. So again, many people describe this time as feeling much more fear. But what I want to do is to give you a kind of a way to think a little bit differently about fear and about anxiety, because I think, and I'm going to ask you to actually experiment a little bit with yourselves, depending on what kind of language you use. Because my belief is that the use of the words fear and anxiety are both overused and misused. And I want to walk you through that so that you have another way to think about it, and as a result, potentially another way to deal with it. So psychology defines fear, broadly speaking, as danger in the moment right now. So what I would have you consider is where are you on that scale? Are you in danger in the moment right now? And if you look around, no, not yet, please. If you're not, I mean, and the way to assess that obviously is, are you safe? Do you have food? Do you have shelter? Do you have family? Do you have friends? Are you in essence well resourced? And if you have those resources and you are not in danger in the moment right now, I would love for you to change that word if you're not in danger. And why am I asking you to do that? Because when we use certain words, they actually activate that state within us. And if, like I said, if you're not in danger, I'm going to ask you to consider something else. So go ahead now, please. The next most logical one then is to use this idea, is to use the word of anxiety, or I feel anxious, or I have a lot of anxiety. Now, again, if I take a look at it in terms of the way psychology defines this, anxiety is typically described as diffuse apprehension or concern that some kind of bad event is going to occur in the future and that it's not going to end well. That it's bad event, a bad outcome. And what I want to say about that is that the word is actually accurate, because being concerned about the future in that way, that the description is accurate, except if I asked 10 people what they meant by anxiety, I would get 10 different answers. So for me, and again, I'm operating it from the standpoint of being a psychologist and a clinician, and specificity tends to be pretty important, that it actually leaves the experience too vague. So what I invite you to do instead is, let's get rid of this word too. Let's set fear aside, let's set anxiety and anxiousness aside, and instead take a look at the next word, which is the next slide, which is to consider what you're actually going through. And what we're all going through right now is this heightened sense of vulnerability, this notion that I could get hurt, or you could get hurt. Now, is it realistic? Heck yeah. There's legitimate dangers regarding the virus and loss of life. People have lost businesses. There's, again, loss of employment, loss of wages, all those different kinds of things. So it's realistic for us to feel more vulnerable in this time. But the first thing I'm going to ask you to do while you're sitting and listening here with me is to just play those words in your mind. Am I fearful? Am I anxious? Or is the truth that I'm actually feeling vulnerable? That I could get hurt, or my kids could get hurt, or whomever during this time. And I think if you notice, you'll actually, because it's a little bit more specific, it actually brings a little bit of a sense of calm. And as a result of that, that's one of the words I'm going to encourage you to start to use during this time. Now, what's interesting about vulnerability is that most of us actually on a day-to-day basis don't think about it. And that's pretty normal. We kind of go through the day, and up until this, 3 months ago, we kind of did our lives the way we did our lives, with vulnerability taking kind of a back seat, so that it wasn't that we were necessarily in touch with it. And what I mean by that is that we were both aware of it and actually felt that sense of vulnerability, like, I could get hurt. And so what's shifted now, and this is part of what I want you to consider, is that not only are we legitimately more vulnerable, but you now you have a felt sense of that vulnerability. So on an emotional and a physical level, you actually feel more vulnerable. And the other thing I want you to consider is that, and this is the kind of the next layer of it, is that you now have heightened awareness of your own vulnerability. And that's actually pretty important, because that, again, the awareness of what you're experiencing can kind of modulate and ease a little bit of that anxious, fearful state when you recognize it as vulnerability. And then the second part of it is we can use vulnerability as actually a launching pad going into the future. So that if we are more aware of our vulnerability, then it can actually help us make different choices in terms of how we might want to lead our lives. So let me go ahead and move on from that. So how did we handle vulnerability? Well, this gets to much of what I talk about in the book, or some portion of what I talk about in the book. And that in the book, the 90 Seconds book that Richard referenced, I talk about 8 unpleasant feelings. Vulnerability happens to be one of them. So if you look at the remaining list, the other 7 feelings are sadness, helplessness, anger, embarrassment, disappointment, shame, and frustration. So what strikes me is that when we feel vulnerable and when we are concerned about getting hurt, and again, if we take it away now a little bit from physical hurt, then it might also include physical hurt, but if we take it away from that, then typically when we are concerned about getting hurt, we're concerned about the emotional outcome that may take place when things don't work out our way. So what's the emotional outcome? Those 7 feelings that are listed right in front of you: sadness, helplessness, anger, embarrassment, disappointment, shame, and frustration. Now, again, you know, and this one, where I will invite you to go with this, is to also think about what your kids are going through at this point, right? Because they're dealing with those feelings. And so my experience, generally speaking, is using this idea of vulnerability, that in order to handle vulnerability, it means we have to get pretty good at handling those other 7 feelings that I've just talked about. Because when we can do that, then we have a much greater sense of confidence, we have a much greater sense of emotional strength, we feel like we can move through things more easily. And I also, in the book, talk about a difference between what I would call non-conscious vulnerability, meaning we're all vulnerable all the time, in essence. We just try to keep it out of our awareness. And another kind of vulnerability called conscious vulnerability that we choose into. So your kids choosing to want to go to medical school, right? Or to vet school, or wherever it is that what the pursuits that they're going after, they're choosing into, they're making themselves vulnerable. But in order to do that, the most important thing they can do is to handle the emotional outcome, which is the other 7 feelings. So how you handle vulnerability? Be able to handle the other 7 feelings that I talk about. Okay, next. The other thing I want you to be able to take away here is that resilience can be learned. And again, I've just been talking about the emotional outcomes. So to handle unwanted emotional outcomes, my belief is that it's important to learn how to experience and move through the 8 unpleasant feelings that I talk about. So very briefly, I want to walk you through how to do this, because a lot of people want to back away from unpleasant feelings and they want to reason them away. And because reasoning them away just seems like it makes it easier for them to deal with, but that's avoidance. So the way I talk about it is through a formula, and the formula is 1 choice, 8 feelings, 90 seconds. What's the choice? The 1 choice, it's awareness as opposed to avoidance. So it's getting off screens, it's not using substances, it's not shopping, the list goes pretty long in terms of all the different ways we can avoid. So my encouragement, choose into awareness as opposed to avoidance. And awareness involves being aware of and in touch with as much of your moment-to-moment experience as possible. So we're choosing into awareness, leaning into the feelings. The 8 feelings I've already talked about. So again, why these 8 feelings? Because they're the most common, everyday, spontaneous reactions to things not turning out the way that we believe we need or the way we want. So it's the everydayness of these feelings. And during any given day or any given week or any given month, we're rolling through those 8 feelings. They're so common. And then the 90 seconds. So, and this was a question that I wrestled with throughout much of my career, is like, what made it so difficult to handle or to tolerate unpleasant feelings? And the key really is the 90-second piece. The truth of the matter is that most of us come to know what we feel emotionally through bodily sensation. So think of embarrassment at the chest and into the neck or into the face, and you're feeling the heat of that. Now, somebody looking at you might see the redness, but you're feeling the heat. That heat is the bodily sensation. And that's how we know we're embarrassed, because we feel that heat. And you have ways to know in your body the way you feel other feelings too. You might clench your jaw when you're angry. You might tighten your fists when you're angry. You might feel a heaviness at your chest when you're disappointed or sad. So, or again, it's different for every one of us. It's different for each of the feelings, and it's also different for each one of us. So the idea here then is that if we come to know what we feel through bodily sensation, it's important to know that those bodily sensations are short-lived. What ends up happening is that when a feeling gets triggered, and then there's a rush of biochemicals into our bloodstream that actually activates those bodily sensations, and then those same biochemicals flush out of our bloodstream in roughly 90 seconds. So my encouragement is for someone to lean into the feeling, be open to experiencing one or more of these 8 unpleasant feelings, because we do the pleasant ones pretty well, and to understand that the way you handle the feeling is to ride one or more short-lived bodily sensation waves. That's how you stay present to the feeling. And if you hang out long enough with it, then often insights come. Then there's maybe an opportunity to go, oh, wait a minute, I think I need to make this decision, or maybe I need to speak up about something. So there's actually a way for us to make use of the feeling once we've felt it. So how do we handle unpleasant feelings? How do we handle the unwanted emotional outcome? We, again, stay aware, lean into the 8 feelings, and ride one or more short-lived bodily sensation waves. This is the foundation of resilience. So being able to handle the emotional outcome, these 8 unpleasant feelings, for me is a foundational piece of resilience. Now, helplessness is one of those feelings that I name as one of the 8. In terms of developing resilience, in the face of helplessness, what I've found is that if you stay well connected to your community and you take action, then both of those tend to kind of mitigate or push back against the experience of helplessness. So that's again one very specific strategy, if you will, for helplessness, or 2 strategies in relation to helplessness itself. And then the next slide, please. Asking for help is also crucial for being able to move through and to be able to develop resilience. So I think about emotional strength as kind of carrying 2 very key elements. One is this ability to experience and move through the 8 unpleasant feelings. The second, which I consider as someone feeling capable, the second has to do with asking for help, which is someone being resourceful. And many people craft like, I don't want to be a burden and affect people that way. I don't want to bring somebody down. The truth is that when we ask for help, we actually value someone else more. Because what the message is, if I'm reaching out to you for help, it's saying I respect you. I value you. I value your opinion. So that one of the things I really want to highlight here is that asking for help is emotional strength. It's the furthest from weakness. And even though some people consider it being emotionally weak, it's actually a representation of your emotional strength. So foundational pieces of resilience, the first one is being able to handle those 8 unpleasant feelings. The second is your capacity to ask for help and to your willingness to lean on others. Obviously, staying very well connected to others and staying engaged with a supportive community. So if you have close friends, that's awesome. Stay well connected. And if you have a broader community that you're connected to, that's also very helpful. All of those support resilience. And another one has to do with, in terms of being resilient, has to do with identifying resources that you need to solve the problem you're concerned about to help or to help you stay calm. So what do I mean by that? My experience when someone is anxious is that the focus is on the problem. The focus is on the worry. So worry, problem, worry, problem, worry, problem. And that the looping, the thinking just loops over and over around that. And what ends up happening is that a focus on the how to solve the problem is lost. So my encouragement here is to stay dialed into resources. So it's like, all right, this is the problem. This is the thing I'm worried about. What is it, or what resources do I need to help me actually deal with this problem? It might be people resources. It might be financial resources. It might be some kind of logistical resources, like maybe you have to get more protective personal gear, if that's part of what's at play, right? So the idea is that you want to focus when you're concerned or in worry or in kind of this anxious state or vulnerability, this vulnerable state, then put your focus not on the worry or the problem, put your focus on the resources that you need to solve the problem. Okay, if we can go to the next one. Other things, sense of humor helps a lot. Being curious, so if you're lost in frustration, see if you can shift. Again, mentally we're able to do things that are different from our feelings, so we can be curious instead. Things like faith or prayer and meditation, and certainly the basics of exercise, nutrition, sunlight, and sleep can make a big difference. Now, what's interesting about resilience is that we can actually feel one way and think another. So you can feel sad about missing events, yet you can have the mental capacity to go, I can grow stronger from this experience. So my thinking can actually be very different from my feeling. And as a result of that, what I invite people to do is to engage in what I call developing resilient thinking. So for instance, I can choose optimism over pessimism. And I'm just going to sneak this one in here, Richard. I actually think of pessimism as preemptive disappointment. You're going to try to have mastery over disappointment before it's occurred. So I'll just be pessimistic, because then I don't have to feel the thing when it actually happens. So what makes us more resilient? Well, pessimism does not. Optimism helps us be more resilient. And the other part of that then is also holding what I would call resilient attitudes and asking resilient questions. So we can go to the next slide. So what's involved in resilient thinking? Resilient attitudes. So we can say to ourselves things like, I am capable and resourceful. And certainly if you've been through difficult life experiences in the past, you can draw on the memories of your prior success, your ability to persevere, and the success itself. So I am capable and resourceful. Another attitude is I can learn and grow from every life experience I go through. I'm going to choose to persevere in the face of frustration. Or another one is I know that change is the constant, and I'm learning to be flexible and adaptive in the face of change. So again, and these are just examples of attitudes that you can hold. And once again, the key distinction I want to make is that the attitude is different from what your feeling might be. And the second part then of developing resilience and resilient thinking has to do with asking resilient questions. So you can ask questions like, how can I use this experience to bring the best out of me? Or how can the one that I referenced a moment ago is, how can I draw on past experiences where I was challenged, I went ahead and persevered, and I was successful? So what was it that I did then that made the big difference? Or how do I want to show up in difficult times? Who do I want to be? And another might be, what skills, talents, and attitudes can I bring to this situation to make it better? So the idea is that the more you're able to identify resilient attitudes, and the more you're able to ask yourself or ask others resilient questions, it actually activates our brain to work to solve that problem, to come up with an answer to that question, so that we can actually develop more of that resilience within ourselves. And I think there might be one or two other slides. This is the last slide, actually. If you're in a leadership role, here's my invitation to you. This is a time for you to find new ways to be relevant. And it's a time for you to lead. So I'm actually going to kind of put a call to action here, is that if you are in a leadership role for yourselves, it's time for you to lead. And we absolutely need that. And I think that's the last slide. There might be one more, I'm not sure. Oh, so that's a free gift thing, Richard, if you want that. So it's right in front of you. So that if people want, actually, I wrote a book called Ease Your Anxiety. If you want a PDF download of that, you can actually go right to that to get it. So that's the presentation per se itself. I am happy to entertain any number of questions to take us further in depth on this, Richard.
Lovely. Well, that was...
Except I can't hear.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, there we go.
Ah.
Perfect.
Am I there?
Awesome.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, because I've got to tell you, each one of the points you made are really, really bullseye to the kinds of things that parents are going through and their young people are going through. And I do have a number of questions that have come in, Joan. And we've got about 25 minutes, and we'll get through as many as we can. What do you say?
I'm all in.
All right. And again, let me just put the book up. This is a very, very, very minimal investment with a very, very big return. And I do encourage everyone watching to just jump on Amazon and push the one-click button and grab a copy of 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. So here we go. Question. How important is an internal locus of control, believing that whatever obstacles lie before us can be tackled using our own resources?
I think an internal locus of control is pretty important. You see yourself as agentic, if you will. You see yourself as being capable of having some impact, and I think that's what we all look for. Is so doing those kinds of things that we can do with that excuse me, that internal locus of control is important. Except I never want to think of us as isolated and only depending on that. We were meant to be social beings, and our ability then to hold that sense that I can be efficacious, I can help impact or help influence is important, and our ability to be able to turn to others and have them help us is also important.
I totally agree with that. My golly. What special considerations are there for for young people in the sense that they lack the perspective of a long life. So I guess they lack perspective, let's put it that way.
And your question is what resources?
What considerations are there in talking to, dealing with these different causes of fear and frustration when you're younger versus when you're older?
Right. Well, I think what becomes really important for parents to be able to do is to speak at, again, the level at whatever level we're talking about in terms of age group, that you're able to help a child begin to think about what's taking place, so that what becomes important here as a parent is, one, for you to be able to model, if you can, your own calm responses to what's taking place, even if we're kind of going through our own stuff, that you're able to help a child make as best sense of what they're going through at this time, and provide the best explanation. And again, there may not be great ones right now for what's taking place. Or to even position yourself as, we're learning some of this together, but helping your child be able to describe what their experience is, and helping them be able to deal with the feelings that they're having, helping be able to explain some of the events to the best of our ability. Those are things that are going to be really important for your child to be able to do. It's to narrate, if you will, to provide a story of what they're going through, because that's going to help them make sense of what's taking place. And the other thing that I would want you as a parent to do is to help them manage, again, those unpleasant feelings. So helping them learn how to manage modulate, experience, move through, whatever words work for you, those unpleasant feeling states, along with their capacity to think through what they're going through, is going to be a crucial life experience, a life skill going forward for them.
So true. Excellent, Joan. We've had several questions on vulnerability, and the question is, how does fear of the unknown relate to vulnerability as opposed to fear of the known? So I think the context here is that at the beginning of the virus, no one knew anything.
Right.
And we were very fearful of everything we didn't know.
Right.
Now we know a lot more, so now we're fearful of what we do know. How does fear of the unknown relate to fear of the known when it comes to vulnerability?
The truth is, we may feel vulnerable in both of those instances, right? So even if I know more about the virus, I can still be concerned about getting it. And what I would say in both instances is that we can get lost in the concern and the worry about the known fear or the known concern as well as the unknown. But when we're lost in that, we're not paying attention to the resources that it will take for us to address that situation. So part of the reason we fear the unknown is because we don't see ourselves as capable of handling what may come. And so we get what we're stuck in that. It's like, I'm not going to be, if it happens, I'm not going to be able to handle it. And so the thing that I'm inviting you into is to go, no. The goal is to go forward and go, you know what? I don't know what I don't know right now. And what I'm going to trust is that I have the thinking ability, the feeling ability, the reasoning ability, the resource connections to help me make sense of it when it happens. So my encouragement is for you to put more of your thinking on resources, not on the unknown.
Very, very good. And just as a side note, one of the things I've observed in so many of the people in my circle, as well as neighbors and friends and everyone, is that at the very beginning of all this, everyone was very afraid and pretty much just froze in place.
Right. That's the shock. Right.
Because you don't know. And when
Right.
you don't know, you kind of freeze in place and shelter and wait until there's more information.
Right.
It's one of the unique times that this has happened in my life, and I found it really fascinating to think about how I reacted, how my
Right.
kids reacted, how my friends reacted in the beginning when we
Right.
didn't
Yep.
know.
Yep. Yeah. No. Agreed. I think, and that's a common, that, if you will, is a common fear response. That's a survival response. Is kind of go into shock and be a little bit frozen with, oh, like, what do I do? Where do I go? And that starts to calm down once we have more information.
All right, next question. This is a good one because it relates to one of the things that so many of these super high achieving kids do, which is overthinking
Yep.
and to some degree ruminating.
Yes.
So the question is, what causes overthinking and what is the best way to stop it?
Overthinking. So I'll give a couple responses to that. I think overthinking occurs, one, as a way to distract from unpleasant feelings. So, and I also think that overthinking occurs when I'm focused on the problem and not on the resources. Right. So we bring some of the same information back in. What I watch happen, Richard, is that people many times, and this obviously happens with adults. It happens with, like I say, with kids under 20 and kids over 20. That we want to reason something away, and so we get lost in the thinking about something and repeating the thoughts about it. And I many times I see that activity as simply a distraction from unpleasant feelings. That if I would allow myself to just be in the feeling, then let's say I keep on going over and over how I didn't get to go to my commencement, as an example. But what's the truth underneath that is that I'm actually sad and disappointed. I didn't get to have an experience that I thought I was going to have. But it's harder for me to handle the sadness and disappointment, so I'll just stay in the thinking loop as a way to distract from that sadness and that disappointment. So one of the things that you can help your child do is to just simply ask the question, is your thinking keeping you away from the real feelings about what's going on? And start with yay. And then the other part of it again is people stay looped into thinking and worrying about a problem for, I think, two reasons. One is to make sense of it. I'm trying to understand the impact and the meaning this is having on me. But I'll stay more in the thinking about it than to go to the impact and meaning. And the second part of it is, again, moving away from resources. I'm not thinking about the resources I need to actually handle the problem. I'm only lost in looping over the problem.
Very, very good. Very good. Next question. Can you be feeling loss or overwhelm without really knowing it? And how can I identify that?
Can you feel lost and overwhelm? Yeah, overwhelm is kind of the feeling like I'm being flooded by too much, and I have a hard time sorting it out. So one of the things I might encourage someone to do is to sit down and actually write. Either to talk with somebody, or I actually think it's a little bit more effective writing first, and to sit down and then write out, all right, I'm feeling lost, I'm feeling overwhelmed. What goes into that for me? What is it that that kind of either evokes or elicits my experience of feeling lost or of feeling overwhelmed? And I think once you start to break it down, it actually allows you to work with what's taking place, because overwhelm is like too much demand, not enough resources. And so if you can, too much demand on me, then I feel overwhelmed. if I can break it down, then I can start to see what I need to do in any of the given situations. So my first thing for that is to break it down in that way, and I would say the same thing in terms of feeling lost. And if you want to take it a step further, what I would say is notice it. Ask yourself if there's any pattern to when these kind of feelings show up, and then I would have you write about that too.
Understood. Understood. And Joan, our next question is, what is your best advice for checking in with yourself emotionally?
Well, there's many ways to do that. For those of you who meditate, meditation is a great way to check in, because you're noticing your internal experience. So that's I would rank that pretty high on the list. The second is, in any given moment, you can actually kind of, no matter where you are during the day, you could be washing dishes for that matter, right, or something like that, and go, how am I? How's my day? What seems to stand out as really important to me today, and what am I feeling? So that you can, if you get in the habit of asking yourself questions, you can use those questions as prompts for you to actually take your life wherever you want to go.
I think this is a very interesting question because I have one friend who uses a chakra clock, which is basically a gong on his iPhone, and it gongs about once an hour.
Right.
And whenever he hears the gong, he comes back to the present for a few seconds.
Yep.
And just checks in with himself.
Yep. That's a great tool.
And he's found that that's been very, very important in his life because so often we're doing stuff, but we're not really checking in with ourselves.
Right. Absolutely true. That's a wonderful idea. And again, the more present we become the more we heighten our awareness, the more present we become, the more choices that are available to us.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. Could you talk about that for just a minute? About how choices are opened up?
Yeah, many of us kind of sleepwalk through life. And we're doing stuff and we're ambitious and want to achieve and do a number of those kinds of things, but we aren't necessarily awake to what we really want. And we're doing something. But that doesn't mean that we're doing something that really gratifies us or brings us a sense of fulfillment, right? And so the something like using the hourly gong kind of thing, or just getting in the habit of asking yourself questions, whatever it might be, or even a morning routine or a nightly routine, or if you're expressing gratitude in the morning or expressing gratitude at night, or those are points to check in. So you can again ask questions. Am I awake to what I really want to do? And so the more you stay present, the more you stay aware, the more you are recognizing that there are choices in front of you. And as a result, you then have more choice to lead a life that you would really love.
This is enormously important advice for you and also to teach your children. I can't think of a greater tragedy in life than coming to a point and realizing you kind of blew it. One of the things I tell your kids, you've probably heard this, is that in my mind, the definition of hell is coming to the end of your life and meeting the person that you might have been.
Right. Potent.
And that must never happen to your child.
Right.
Never. The next question we've received, Joan, is I want to help my friend with her anxiety. What are some of the ways that I can do that?
Well, Um, the first is to understand that the way I look at anxiety is to see it as a cover or a distraction from unpleasant feelings. The first one to consider, so you can help her kind of walk through a sequence. The first one to consider, is she feeling vulnerable? And would just saying that she feels vulnerable make more sense than saying that she's anxious? If she's not feeling that, the second would be to have her consider the other 7 feelings and to see if she's feeling some of those. So that's first. Second strategy would be to ask her to shift her thinking to saying to herself that she's capable and resourceful, because people who are anxious tend not to feel capable nor resourceful. The third is, if someone's anxious, my experience many times, Richard, is that when someone is anxious, then they're also not speaking up. So they're not using their voice in situations that actually it would be very beneficial if they did. So they feel the anxiety instead. It goes in as opposed to being expressed out. And that when one starts to use their voice to speak to the things that need to be addressed, then whether it's a loving statement, whether it's a difficult conflictual statement, or whether it's a loving statement, that learning how to speak up becomes a crucial part of mitigating anxiety. And I'm actually going to give you one other strategy for the person who asked the question. And what I would do is I would have you write 8 words, kind of one right below the next. And the 8 words are thoughts, feelings, words, actions. Thoughts, feelings, words, actions, beliefs, attitudes and beliefs, values, my past history, and who I want to become. So just kind of one right after the other underneath. And for the person who's anxious, there's a mismatch between one or more of those words. So maybe I'm thinking something, but I'm not saying it. Or maybe I've engaged in an action that doesn't fit my values, or it doesn't fit my beliefs and my attitude, or it doesn't fit who I want to become. Where there's a mismatch, there's anxiety. So you can actually pinpoint what needs to be dealt with and what needs to be shifted. It gives you the path to what you need to do to actually correct that mismatch.
Well, that is very practical, and I love that one. I love that one. I really do. We have time for a couple more questions,
Sure.
And I'm going to ask the control room to also be ready to pull up that last slide, because I want to show all the parents again how they can download the PDF that Dr. Rosenberg has so generously offered, and we'll do that in a moment if we can just get ready for that. We'll take care of that. Now, 2 more questions.
Please.
The first is, this is from someone, it looks like it's a student, who says, how do I overcome my fears to step up into a leadership role?
That again, it's simple. It's simple for me to tell you. It may feel harder to do, but I'll just suggest to you it's easy to do. If you want to take a leadership role, you're choosing into vulnerability. You're choosing into saying, all right, I want to go do something. I want to move my life forward. And that means you're putting yourself in the position of being hurt, right? And what's the hurt going to look like? If things don't turn out, it's going to be one or more of the other 7 feelings. So for you to choose to go into that leadership role, see yourself as being willing and capable of dealing with those other 7 feelings if they should arise. If you see yourself as capable in that way, you can go choose to do whatever you want. So why? Because the emotional outcome, most people do not fear the thing when they want to go pursue something. They fear the emotional outcome of the thing if it doesn't work out well. So if you already go into this leadership position knowing, you know what, I can get hurt, I'm game, I'm in, because I know what it's going to do for me in terms of advancing my life, great. And I'm willing to handle the emotional outcome of things getting kind of wonky or messy and deal with those unpleasant feelings along the way. And, you know, and I often think of our, when we become successful, and I don't like to use the word failure, we disappoint ourselves to success. We deal with countless disappointments on our way to success. So if you're game, go for it. And just know that the worst possible thing is that you're going to experience one or more of those other 7 feelings.
Right there, folks, is so much wisdom. And this is very complementary to what I tell your kids, which is that you're going to fail your way to success.
Right.
And, you know, Dr. Rosenberg's point here is so massively important, is that that does not come without an emotional toll. And it's being willing to go forth in spite of that and simply ride those waves.
Right, right.
The difference between someone who's going to reach their potential and someone who never will, I think.
I totally agree with you, Richard. In fact, the premise of the book is that if you can ride one or more short-lived bodily sensation waves of one or more of 8 unpleasant feelings, you can go pursue anything you want in life.
And it's true. I mean, it's really true. And the more you think about it, the more true you realize it is. Because you realize all the little ways that we say no to things simply because we are afraid of the potential negative feeling that that's going to generate within us. And we don't want to feel that.
Right.
So we don't take the chance of doing that thing. At it.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm gonna
make one.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna make one slight adjustment to that. And I don't tend to call these feelings, the 8 feelings, as bad or negative, because they're actually there for protective purposes. So actually, if you change that language, it even makes it a little easier, because they're uncomfortable, they're unsettling, or they're unpleasant. But they're not bad or negative. And it makes it a little bit easier to tolerate if you just see them as uncomfortable and not see them as bad or negative.
And at the end of the day, if you believe they can't hurt you, then they can't hurt you.
No, in fact, they're there for your protection.
And finally, and this is, I saved this one for last, you know, these young people aspire to be physicians or medical scientists, which of course, in the case of physicians, is going to put them in daily patient contact.
Yes.
The question is, what advice do you have for aspiring physicians as we come in contact with patients every day? And I think what they're getting at there is, Joan, is who may have these feelings.
Okay. Well, then, listen. The better you are at being able to experience and move through your own unpleasant feelings, the better you are able to respond to a patient coming in with those same feelings. So that the most important thing that you can do is to be a great listener, number one, and the second is never to try to talk somebody out of what they're experiencing. When you acknowledge the truth of what they're experiencing, so if they're scared or they're experiencing pain or they're describing something as sad and disappointing and difficult, then acknowledge that difficulty. That's how you empathically connect with them, and then they calm down. So when the truth is acknowledged, then someone actually calms. And so my biggest encouragement to you as physicians or upcoming physicians is be great listeners and respond empathically to the pain. And you'll have a practice that will be filled for however long you want it to be filled. That's when you come from the heart, it makes a massive difference to the patient.
Oh, such beautiful advice. And I've experienced that myself. I'm sure you have, with great clinicians. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, Joan, unbelievably, our hour has already passed. And we're going to show that slide again so folks can download the PDF, which is very generous of you. I want to show your book one last time because it's such a great book.
Thank you.
And I really do hope that everyone makes the nominal investment of picking up a copy, because you really can help yourself and your child a great deal. And the other thing that Joan has told me is that later on this year, she's going to be releasing a home study course. And I'm very excited about that. And I'm going to let you and all the young people and all of the alumni know about that as well as soon as it's ready, because I think that also allows us at our own pace to be able to create enormous value for our kids. And isn't that what we as parents are really here for?
Right.
So with that, Joan, I just want to, on behalf of all of us, thank you so, so much for taking time out of your weekend to be with us and to help us in this way.
I'm honored, Richard. Thank you for including me.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, parents, we're only 4 days away from the Congress. We'll talk tomorrow, and I'll be in the car driving down to North Carolina, and we'll check in and make sure that you and your kids are all set for this experience. And with that in mind, thank you, be safe, and we will talk soon.